the morning my son finally saw his father clearly. I was standing in the doorway of my own office, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier, watching 30 years of silence finally break open in front of me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it really started. Not the boardroom, not the lawyers, not the moment everything collapsed. It started at a dinner table in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a Thursday evening in early November, when I made the mistake of saying out loud the thing I had been quietly carrying for 2 years. I said, I wanted to open my own bookkeeping firm. My husband Raymond laughed first. Then my son Clifton joined in. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, smiling at the tablecloth, waiting for the moment to pass the way I had learned to let so many moments pass over the course of our marriage. But this one didn't pass. This one stayed with me all the way to where I am now. When people looked at my husband Raymond Aldridge, they saw a man who had built something. And he had. I'll always give him that much. Raymond started Aldridge Financial Services out of a rented office the size of a closet in 1987, when we were young and broke and completely certain of each other. He was good with clients. He had a voice that made people feel safe, a handshake that lingered a second longer than necessary, the kind of warmth that reads as trustworthiness in business rooms. What Raymond was not good at was the actual accounting. That part was me. I had been a bookkeeper before we married. My own mother taught me double entry ledgers on paper before software existed. Numbers had always made sense to me the way language makes sense to other people. Naturally, instinctively, without effort. When Raymond launched the firm, he knew exactly what he was selling. He was selling confidence, and I was the one making sure the confidence was backed by something real. For the first several years, I worked beside him every single day. I reconciled accounts. I flagged discrepancies before they became problems. I stayed up past midnight during tax season when clients panicked, answering emails Raymond was too tired to deal with. When payroll was short during a rough quarter in 1993, I moved money from my personal savings without telling him, because I didn't want him to spiral. I did it quietly, the way I did everything back then. The way women in certain marriages learn to do things, smoothly, invisibly, without requiring acknowledgement. Raymond always said we were a team. For a long time, I believed him. Somewhere around the time the firm grew large enough to hire real staff, I faded into the background. Raymond hired an office manager, then an in-house accountant, then a junior partner named Stuart who wore bow ties and laughed too loudly at everything Raymond said. My name quietly disappeared from the door. I became Raymond's wife, the woman who came to the holiday party and made small talk with clients and kept her opinions to herself during conversations about business, because Raymond always redirected me with a smile. Diane's our home base, he'd say. She keeps everything running smoothly on the domestic side. Domestic side. I knew what that meant. I had moved from partner to furniture, so gradually I almost didn't notice it happening. Our son Clifton had grown up watching his father run meetings and close deals and come home smelling like success. By his mid-30s, Clifton was everything Raymond raised him to be. Confident, decisive, a little careless with other people's feelings. He worked in real estate development and spoke about money the way people speak about sports, casually and constantly. His wife, Tara Belmont, was polite enough to me in the careful way of someone keeping score. Our daughter Nina was different. She had always noticed things. Nina noticed when I slipped out to the kitchen to refill drinks nobody asked for, just to have somewhere to put myself during Raymond's dinner parties. She noticed when he cut me off in conversation and laughed, the way he always laughed, like my speaking was a small endearing interruption to whatever the real discussion was. She noticed the look on my face afterward, the brief reorganization of expression I had practiced for decades. And she never said anything because she was still learning how to challenge her father. Honestly, so was I. By my early 60s, I had become a woman who lived inside someone else's story. Raymond's firm was thriving. Our house in Myers Park was beautiful. My grandchildren called on Sundays. From the outside, my life looked complete. From the inside, I had stopped asking myself what I actually wanted because the question felt ungrateful. That's another thing women in certain marriages absorb without meaning to. You stop wanting things that aren't on the approved list. And eventually you forget you ever had a list of your own. Then one evening in October, About 2 years before everything changed, Raymond hosted a dinner for a group of corporate clients at our home. I cooked for 2 days. Beef tenderloin, roasted vegetables, a lemon tart I had made from scratch. I set the table the way I used to set it for important occasions. The good china, the cloth napkins, fresh flowers from the yard. During dinner, one of the clients, a woman named Sandra, asked Raymond how he kept his small business clients from making the same cash flow mistakes year after year. Before Raymond answered, I found myself saying, "We built a quarterly review system early on. It flags patterns before they become emergencies. Most small business owners only look at numbers when something's already wrong. This keeps them looking when things are still fine." Sandra turned toward me, genuinely interested. That's exactly the problem no one seems to solve well. Did you design that yourself? Before I could answer, Raymond chuckled warmly. Diane used to love playing with spreadsheets back in the day. She could organize anything. Grocery lists, vacation schedules. He shook his head with fond amusement. Now she mostly keeps me organized. Everyone laughed, including me, because that was the deal I had made with myself 30 years earlier. Keep the room comfortable. Keep Raymond comfortable. Absorb whatever you need to absorb and deal with it later in the kitchen while you're washing dishes. But later that night, standing at the sink with the warm water running over my hands, I finally allowed myself to feel how much that moment had cost me. Raymond walked in, loosening his collar. "Great evening," he said. "Sandra loved you." I kept my eyes on the dishes. She was asking about the quarterly review system. He opened the refrigerator. "That was my system, Raymond." He turned and looked at me the way he sometimes did, not unkindly, but with the particular patience of a man who has decided you are being unnecessarily complicated. "Diane, I'm not going to argue about something from 20 years ago. I'm not arguing. You're tired." "We both are." It was a long night. He went upstairs. I stood at the sink for another 10 minutes, not washing anything. Just standing there, realizing that the sentence he'd said, something from 20 years ago, had accidentally told me something important. He remembered it as mine. He just didn't think it mattered that he'd taken it. That was the night I started seeing clearly. I want to tell you the decision came dramatically. Some women describe it that way. A lightning bolt moment. A single sentence that changes everything. For me, it was slower than that. It crept in over the following months like a draft under a door you've stopped noticing. I started paying attention to the things I had been quietly managing all my life. The household accounts. The family investment tracking I'd been doing in a spreadsheet Raymond didn't know existed. The informal tax advice I gave to our neighbor, Gwen Foster, every spring when she came over confused about her quarterly payments. The way people in my church circle always ended up asking me to review their small business finances before tax season. And how I always helped, and how none of it had a name, because I was just being helpful. I had been doing the work my entire adult life. I had simply never charged for it. The night I told my family I wanted to open a bookkeeping firm, I chose a Sunday dinner in November, because all 4 of us were together for the first time in months. Clifton and Tara had driven down from Raleigh. Nina was in from Atlanta. I made pot roast because it was the meal that made everyone comfortable. And I suppose I was trying to soften something I already knew would land badly. Raymond was at the head of the table scrolling something on his phones. Clifton was telling a story about a property deal. Nina was helping me pass the bread basket. I set down my glass and said it plainly. "I've been thinking about starting my own firm. Small business bookkeeping, mostly. The kind of back-office support that solo contractors and independent shops can't usually afford to outsource." The table went quiet. Not the dramatic kind of quiet. The confused kind, where people are recalibrating what they just heard. Raymond put his phone down slowly. Clifton looked at me the way he looked at things that didn't make sense to him. Nina's hand stilled on the bread basket. I kept my voice steady. "I've been doing informal consulting for years." Gwen Foster's filed correctly for the first time since her husband passed. The Duncans have their quarterly payments automated now. "I know this work. I've always known it." Raymond leaned back in his chair. "Diane." He said my name the way you say the name of someone who's about to make a mistake in front of an audience. "You're talking about starting a business. At 63? Yes." Clifton exhaled through his nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Something in between that conveyed, very efficiently, what he thought. Mom, starting a firm is not the same as helping Gwen with her taxes. I know the difference. Do you? His voice wasn't cruel. That was the harder part. He genuinely thought he was being reasonable. You're talking about client acquisition, liability insurance, software infrastructure, compliance. I spent 15 years doing compliance work for your father's firm before you were old enough to know what compliance meant. A beat of silence. Raymond's expression shifted, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes that I recognized. That was a long time ago, he said carefully. The fundamentals haven't changed. Clifton glanced at Raymond the way sons sometimes look at fathers when they need someone to settle things. Raymond set down his fork. Diane, I want to be honest with you. He used the voice he reserved for clients he was gently redirecting. The market for independent bookkeeping services is saturated. The software does most of what you're describing automatically now. You'd be entering a competitive space with no established client base, no staff, and, he paused. Frankly, no current credentials. No current credentials. I looked at my husband. I trained you, Raymond. The table went very still. That was a partnership, he said after a moment. That's different. How is it different? He didn't answer that. Instead, he picked up his fork and said, with the finality of someone changing a channel, I just think there are better ways to stay active in retirement. Consulting work, maybe? Something smaller. Something smaller. Nina put her hand on mine under the table. I squeezed it and let go. Clifton added more gently, We just don't want you to embarrass yourself, Mom. Embarrass myself. I smiled at the table the way I had smiled at dinner tables my entire adult life, pleasantly, patiently, finishing the meal as if nothing significant had happened. But later that night, after Clifton and Tara drove back to Raleigh, and Nina had gone to bed, and Raymond was upstairs watching television, I sat alone at the kitchen table with my laptop open. The house was quiet except for the sound of the heating system clicking on. My hands were perfectly steady when I opened the North Carolina Secretary of State website. Business name: Aldridge Bookkeeping Solutions. I thought about using a different name, something with no connection to Raymond, but another part of me said no. I had helped build the Aldridge reputation in this city. I had earned that name the same as he had, just without any of the credit, and I intended to let the truth attach itself to whatever I built next. I entered my information: LLCC registration, bookkeeping and financial consulting services, small business specialization. On the final screen, the button said Submit Application. Upstairs, Raymond was laughing at something on television. That sound drifted down through the ceiling like a small familiar wound. I pressed Submit, and in the quiet of my kitchen, at 63 years old, I started over. Starting a business when you're in your 60s is nothing like starting one when you're young. When you're young, people call the same risk ambitious. When you're older, they call it a phase. The morning after I filed, I woke up before Raymond with a particular kind of panic sitting on my chest, the kind that whispers you've made a fool of yourself in your own home. For a few minutes, lying there in the gray early light, I came close to convincing myself to let the whole thing quietly disappear. File a cancellation. Tell no one. Let Clifton be right. Then Raymond rolled over half asleep and murmured, Don't forget to call the insurance adjuster back today. The deck claim. Not good morning, not how are you. Just a task, assigned before he even fully surfaced from sleep. One more item on the list he had been running my life from for 30 years. Something in me went very still and very clear at the same time. I got up, went downstairs, and made coffee. Then I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and got to work. The first 2 months were, in a word, humbling. I built a website nobody visited. I printed business cards that lived in a box by the toaster. I sent introductory emails to 12 small business owners in the Charlotte area and received 4 polite non-responses and 1 auto-reply. I attended a Chamber of Commerce networking breakfast and stood near the coffee station for 45 minutes before anyone spoke to me, and when they did, it was to ask if I was there with someone. Yes, I thought. I'm here with myself. That's the whole point. Rejection at 63 feels different than it does at 30. At 30, failure is a detour. At 63, there's a voice in the back of your head that wonders if the people who said you couldn't are simply being proven right in real time. I kept going anyway. Every morning after Raymond left for his golf games and his client lunches, I sat at that kitchen table and kept going. I read industry updates. I refreshed my certifications through an online program. I studied common errors in small business quarterly filings. I learned new software I'd never used but understood immediately, because the underlying logic was identical to the systems I'd built by hand 25 years earlier. About 6 weeks in, I got a phone call from a woman named Yvette Drummond. She'd gotten my name through Gwen Foster. She sounded apologetic before she'd said anything of substance, the way people do when they're asking for something they've been told they shouldn't need. "I run a small catering company," she said. "We're growing faster than I expected, and honestly, my books are a disaster. I've been doing it myself and I think I've made some mistakes. I can't afford the big firms. Can I see what you have?" I asked. She hesitated. "It's pretty bad." I smiled despite myself. "Good. The bad ones are where I do my best work." Yvette came to my house 2 days later, with a grocery bag full of receipts and a flash drive, with spreadsheets so disorganized they were almost artistic. We spread everything across the dining table. I found 3 filing errors immediately, 2 of them significant. "You're not categorizing your equipment depreciation correctly," I told her. "And your quarterly estimates aren't accounting for seasonal SPs. You're overpaying in February and underpaying in August." Yvette leaned over the table staring at what I was showing her. "Nobody caught that. Most people don't look for it until the IRS does." We worked for 4 hours that first afternoon. I rebuilt her categorization system from scratch, automated her quarterly tracking, and walked her through a cash flow projection I designed specifically for catering businesses with irregular revenue cycles. When she left, she hugged me at the door. She said, "You have no idea how much I needed this." 3 weeks later, she called me shouting. She'd gotten approved for a small business loan she'd been denied twice before. The bank cited clean financials and a solid projection model. I laughed until my eyes watered. Not because of the money. Yvette's fee wasn't large. Because someone had trusted me with something real, and I had come through. That feeling had been absent from my life for so long, I had almost forgotten what it felt like to matter in a way that was specifically, undeniably mine. Yvette started telling people about me. Word in small business networks travels in a particular way, not through advertising, through exhaustion. People find you when they've already run out of other options, and when you actually help, they don't just leave a review. They call their cousin who owns the dry cleaner, and their friend who just started a landscaping company, and the woman in their church circle who's been struggling with her boutique's inventory system. Within 3 months, I had 7 active clients. I raised my rates. All 7 stayed. Raymond noticed. At first, he treated it the way men like Raymond treat inconvenient things. He minimized it. He'd walk through the kitchen while I was on a client call and raise his eyebrows slightly. Once he asked, with the tone of someone indulging a grandchild, "So how's the little operation coming along?" "Growing," I said without looking up. "You making any real money yet?" I named a figure. He paused slightly. Then he said, "Well, that covers gas, I guess," and went to find his golf shoes. That night Nina called. She called every week. "How's business?" she asked, and she meant it in the way only she meant things. "Scary," I said. "But good. Scary how?" "Scary like when something is actually working and you keep waiting for it to stop." She laughed softly. "Mom, you've been doing this work your whole life. You're just finally putting your name on it." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. She was right. I had spent decades building competency in the dark, where no one could see it, and therefore no one could take credit for it, and also where it couldn't threaten anyone. Now that it was in the light, things were beginning to shift. Because Raymond's firm, noticing, had started to show cracks. Little things at first. He mentioned losing a mid-sized client to a competitor. Then another. His office manager quit after 12 years, and the replacement he hired was gone in 4 months. I overheard a phone call once. The tense kind, where the other voice is inaudible, but Raymond's face tells the whole story, and I recognized the topic without being able to hear the words. It was the same tone he used to get in the early years, before I built the systems that kept those situations from escalating. I didn't step in. For the first time in 30 years, I let things run their course. That felt like the strangest act of self-preservation I had ever committed. About 8 months after I opened Aldrich Bookkeeping Solutions, I attended a small business owner luncheon at a hotel downtown. I didn't know many people in the room. I wore a blazer I'd bought specifically because I was tired of dressing in ways that made me easy to overlook. 3 people came up to me before the salads arrived. One of them was a contractor named James Whitmore who had heard my name from Yvette's husband. Another was a woman who ran a chain of nail salons and had been looking for someone who understood franchise accounting without charging her franchise prices. The third was a quiet man named Hector Davila who owned a restaurant supply company and said simply, "A friend told me you're the one who fixes things before they become disasters." I smiled. "I try to be." He handed me his card. "Call me this week." Across the room, I noticed Raymond. He was there for a networking event his firm was sponsoring. He stood near the bar talking to developers, doing what Raymond did best, filling a room with his presence. His eyes found me once, and the look on his face was something I'd never seen directed at me before. He looked uncertain, not angry, not amused, uncertain, because people were coming to me, not to him, not because of him, to me. That evening in the car on the way home, he was quiet for longer than usual. Then finally, "You know Hector Davila? He's been a referral target of mine for 2 years. He introduced himself to me tonight," I said. Raymond kept his eyes on the road. "What did he want?" "To talk about his accounting needs." A pause. "You should be careful about the clients you take on, Diane. Some of these smaller operators are more complicated than they look." I looked out the window at the Charlotte skyline passing in the dark. "I appreciate that," I said, and then I didn't say anything else. But that night, after Raymond fell asleep, I lay in the dark thinking about all the years I had taken his warnings as wisdom. All the times I had let him explain my own field back to me. And I thought, when did I start letting someone else's discomfort decide what I was capable of? The answer, honestly, was 30 years ago. At a kitchen table not unlike my own. I was not willing to wait another 30 years to correct it. The first time I noticed something wrong with the financial documents, I thought I was misreading them. It was a rainy afternoon in February, and I was in Raymond's home office looking for a folder of old insurance correspondence. My newest client, a woman who was refinancing her small photography studio, needed a specific type of liability documentation as a reference, and I remembered seeing something similar in Raymond's archived files. I found what I was looking for, but inside the same box I found something else. An equipment financing agreement from 2019, attached to a home equity draw I didn't remember signing. I read it again. My name was on it, Diane Aldridge, co-signatory. The signature didn't look right. I sat on the floor of his office for a while, just looking at it. I'm a bookkeeper. I've spent my career reading documents carefully. I know what my own signature looks like, not just the general shape, but the small specific habits of it. The way the D leans slightly left. The way the final E in Aldridge drops below the line. This one didn't have those things. I found 2 more in the same box. My stomach went cold in the slow, terrible way of something you suspected before you consciously knew. I carried the folder to the dining room and spent 2 hours comparing signatures to documents I knew for certain I had signed. Our mortgage renewal from 2017, a healthcare proxy from 2020, birthday cards I'd kept in a drawer. The pattern was consistent. Some looked exactly right. Others had small differences that accumulated into something impossible to dismiss. I didn't say anything to Raymond that night. I made dinner. I listened to him talk about a prospect he was courting. I washed dishes. But that night after he was asleep, I took pictures of every document with my phone, went downstairs, and made copies. I put them in a waterproof folder inside a tote bag at the back of my closet behind winter coats. It felt like a betrayal and also like the most sensible thing I had ever done. 2 days later, Nina came by on her way to a work conference. She took one look at me at the door and said, "What happened?" I told her. She sat at the kitchen table with the copies spread in front of her for a long time without saying anything. When she finally looked up, her eyes were serious in a way that went past surprise. "Mom, you need a lawyer. I don't know what this is yet. I do." She reached across the table. "Protect yourself first. You can figure out what it means later." That afternoon, I made an appointment with an attorney named Beverly Stroud. She was a woman in her late 50s who had been recommended by a client of mine, and who specialized in financial litigation and family law. She reviewed the documents without any visible reaction, which told me she had seen things like this before. These are worth examining further, she said carefully. I can't tell you yet what the intent was, but I can tell you that your name being on these obligations without your knowledge is something we take seriously. I drove home with the kind of clarity that arrives after you've been afraid of something for a long time, and finally decided to stop being afraid. That evening, I confronted Raymond in the living room, where he was reading the news on his tablet. I put the folder on the coffee table. He looked at it, then at me. Where did you get those? Your filing box. Were you ever going to tell me? Set down tablet very deliberately. Those are business documents. They're complicated. Is my signature real on this one? He didn't answer right away. That was its own kind of answer. Raymond. Is my signature real? He exhaled. There were timing issues. The loan window was closing and you were traveling with Nina. I needed a co-signatory to complete the draw. So you signed my name. I signed for you. There's a difference. I looked at my husband, the man I had made a life with, the man whose business I had built before he knew how to run it, the man who laughed at our dinner table while our son laughed beside him. And I felt something settle permanently in my chest. No, I said quietly. There isn't. Raymond stood. Diane, I kept this family financially secure for 30 years. One administrative shortcut during a cash flow problem is not. How many times? He stopped. How many documents, Raymond? How many times did you sign my name to something without asking me? The silence that followed was the longest of our marriage. Finally, he sat back down. A few times. Over the years, when things were tight. A few times. Over the years. I picked up the folder and walked upstairs. Clifton arrived 2 days later. He didn't call first. He knocked on the door with his key in his hand the way he used to when he was a teenager coming home late and hoping to avoid a conversation. He sat at the kitchen table across from me, with his hands folded like a man who had rehearsed this. Dad told me what you found. Then you know. Clifton rubbed his jaw. He was trying to protect the business that paid for this house, for our schools. Clifton. He stopped. I know what the business paid for. I helped build it. He looked down. I know you helped. Helped. That word again. Such a small container for what I had actually done. Your father used my name without my permission, I said carefully. More than once. Beverly Stroud is reviewing the documents. Clifton's head came up. You hired a lawyer? Yes. He looked genuinely alarmed. Mom, this doesn't need to go that far. Dad made some decisions under pressure. It doesn't have to become a legal situation. I looked at my son. He was 41 years old and he was asking me to make a problem disappear to protect a man who had never once made a problem disappear to protect me. I'm not doing this to punish your father, I said. I'm doing it because my name is on financial documents I didn't sign, and I need to understand what that means for me. Clifton was quiet for a moment. Then, you've changed since you started this business. Yes, I said simply. He seemed to want more than that. I didn't have more than that to give him. The thing about discovering you've been deceived by someone you trusted is that it reorganizes your entire memory. Every time Raymond rushed a signature, every time he said just initial here, every time he told me I didn't need to read the whole thing, he had it handled. I had trusted him the way wives of my generation were taught to trust their husbands, completely, in the specific areas designated as his. And he had used that trust as a tool. Beverly Stroud spent 6 weeks reviewing everything. What she found was not catastrophic in a criminal sense, but it was significant. Several instruments bore signatures that were inconsistent with my known signed documents. Raymond's firm had also taken on more debt exposure than I was aware of. My name appeared on obligations I had never knowingly agreed to. You have options, Beverly told me, and you have protections that you weren't taking advantage of before. I listened carefully, and for the first time in 30 years, I made financial decisions about my own life without consulting Raymond. Meanwhile, something else was happening. My business was growing in a way that had moved beyond anything I'd quietly allowed myself to expect. James Whitmore referred me to his brother-in-law, who owned a small electrical contracting company. His brother-in-law referred me to a woman named Cecily Park, who ran a tutoring center and had been operating without a real bookkeeping system for 3 years. Hector Davila signed a 6-month engagement. I hired a part-time assistant named Rhonda, who was retired from banking and sharp as anyone I'd ever worked with. On the morning I signed my first lease, a small office suite on the second floor of a building on South Boulevards. I stood alone in the empty room for a few minutes before anyone else arrived. Just a room with gray carpet and tall windows and afternoon light coming through at an angle. I stood in the middle of it and thought, this is mine, not ours. Mine. Nina came to see the space that weekend and walked through every room twice. When she came back to where I was standing, she had tears in her eyes and was pretending she didn't. You sound different on the phone now, she said. Different how? Like you expect people to listen. I laughed. I'm still surprised when they do. She shook her head slowly. I've been watching you wait for permission your whole life. It's strange to see you stop. That sentence stayed with me for weeks, because she was right in a way I hadn't fully reckoned with yet. I hadn't just been waiting for permission from Raymond. I'd been waiting for it from everyone. From Clifton, from clients, from the version of myself that had learned to make herself small enough to be acceptable. I was done waiting. The conflict with Raymond came to its real head, not with lawyers or confrontations, but at a conference room table on a Wednesday morning in April, in a meeting I hadn't known I would be attending until 48 hours before it happened. A development group based in Charlotte was assembling a consortium of professional services firms to support a large mixed-use development project. The kind of project that would require years of ongoing bookkeeping, financial oversight, and small business compliance support for the retail tenants. Someone on their team had heard about Aldridge Bookkeeping Solutions through Hector Davila, and they reached out directly. The meeting was at their offices. I prepared for 2 weeks. What I didn't know, until I arrived in the lobby, was that Raymond's firm was also presenting that morning. I saw him across the lobby before he saw me. He was with his junior partner Stuart, both of them in suits, Raymond carrying the same leather portfolio he'd had for 15 years. Then he looked up and saw me. For a moment, neither of us moved. He crossed the lobby slowly. Diane, what are you doing here? I was invited. He looked genuinely confused. Then, as it settled, something shifted in his face that I had never seen there before. He was afraid. Not of losing the contract. Something larger. Something about the narrative he'd been living inside. The one where he was the professional and I was the domestic one. And how that narrative was now standing in a lobby, in a blazer, with a briefcase of its own. This is a significant project, he said carefully. I know. That's why I prepared. His jaw tightened slightly. These are corporate clients, Diane. It's not the same as working with small businesses. I'll let them decide that. We presented separately. I don't know exactly what Raymond said in his meeting. I know what I said in mine. I spoke for 40 minutes about the specific financial management structure I would build for retail tenants, customized to their size, their industry, their seasonal pressures. I talked about the system I designed for Yvette Drummond and how I'd adapted it 3 times since. I showed projections. I answered every question directly, without hedging. At the end, the project director said, "You're not what I expected." I smiled. "What did you expect?" She hesitated diplomatically. Then, honestly, someone younger. I nodded. Most of the experience people are paying for at my level came from somewhere. Mine came from 30 years of doing the work before anyone was watching. She wrote something on her notepad. 3 weeks later, they called me. They offered Aldridge Bookkeeping Solutions the primary financial services contract for the retail consortium. I was in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store when I got the call. I sat there for several minutes after I hung up, watching people come and go with their carts, this completely ordinary scene, while something enormous rearranged itself quietly inside me. I called Nina. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I didn't call Clifton. I didn't call Raymond. Not because I wanted them to feel anything in particular, but because for the first time in my adult life, my best news belonged only to me, and I wanted to hold it that way for a little while. Raymond found out through industry contacts before I told him. He came home that evening already knowing. I could tell from the way he moved through the house. Carefully, like someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. "You got the consortium contract." "Yes," he looked at his hands. "That was a significant project for us to pursue." I know, a long pause. "I didn't think they'd go with a small firm," I said gently. "Runs by a 63-year-old woman." He didn't answer. "Raymond." I waited until he looked at me. I want you to understand something. I didn't pursue that contract to compete with you. I pursued it because I was qualified. And they agreed. He was quiet for a very long time. Then, quietly, I've spent 30 years telling myself I built something on my own. I didn't say anything. I think I knew the whole time that wasn't completely true. He looked out the window. I think that's why I needed you to stay small. I had waited a long time to hear something like that. Decades, honestly. And now that it was here, it didn't feel the way I'd imagined. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the edge of something very wide. You used my name on those documents, I said. I know. Beverly is still reviewing everything. I know. His voice was low. I'm not going to fight you on it. That surprised me enough that I looked at him directly. He looked older than I'd seen him look. Not physically, emotionally. Like the performance had finally cost too much to keep running. I was wrong, he said. About a lot of things. Those words were 30 years late and true at the same time. The moment that broke everything open for Clifton happened 2 weeks after Raymond, and I began formal separation proceedings. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a Tuesday afternoon in my office, and Clifton stopped by unannounced the way he had started doing, tentatively, like he was testing whether the door was still open. He stood near my desk while I was finishing a call, and when I hung up, he said, I need to ask you something. All right. He sat down. He had the look he used to get as a child when he knew he'd done something wrong, but hadn't figured out how to say it yet. Did you know? Did you always know how much you contributed to Dad's firm? I looked at my son carefully. I knew what I did. I didn't always know how to make other people see it. He rubbed the back of his neck. I called it a little operation. You did. And at dinner, when you first told us, I just laughed. I didn't even think about it. He trailed off. I watched Dad do that to you my whole life, and I thought it was normal. I stayed quiet. I'm sorry, Mom. His voice cracked slightly at the edges. I should have seen it sooner. I should have. At that dinner table, I should have said something different. The thing about an apology from your child is that it lands in a completely different place than an apology from anyone else. It doesn't fix the past. It doesn't unhappen the years of being spoken over and underestimated and called a little operation. But it opens something. I reached across the desk and put my hand over his. You were taught what you were taught, I said. What matters is what you do with it now. He nodded. His eyes were wet and he was trying not to show it, which was so like him, so like both of them, that it made my chest ache a little. You built something real, he said quietly. I built 2 things, I said. This office, and 30 years before this office. He looked at me for a moment, then he said, I know you did. That was enough. Beverly Stroud's work concluded 4 months later. The forged signatures resulted in a restructured debt agreement that removed my name from all instruments I had not knowingly signed. Raymond cooperated fully. His firm absorbed the liability. It cost him significantly. We did not reconcile. Some things break in ways that don't mend, and what Raymond and I had was one of those things. Not because I stopped caring for him. Some part of me will probably always carry the man he was when we ate takeout on a floor, because we couldn't afford a table. But trust, once you understand how it was used against you, doesn't simply rebuild itself on request. I gave it too much grace for too many years. I was no longer willing to give it further. I moved into a townhouse 10 minutes from my office that fall. It had a screened porch and a kitchen with good light. The first morning I woke up there, I lay in the quiet and waited for the familiar weight of someone else's needs to settle on my chest the way it always had. It didn't come. What came instead was silence. And inside silence, something I hadn't felt since I was very young. Belonging to myself, Aldridge Bookkeeping Solutions finished the year with 19 active clients, 3 long-term engagements, and a waiting list. We hired 2 more people. Rhonda became my full-time operations manager and took to the role with the particular authority of a woman who had been underused for years and knew exactly what to do with room. Nina joined me as a part-time consultant on the development project, which gave us something we had never quite had before, a professional relationship. We sat across from each other in meetings, and she challenged my projections and I challenged hers, and we were both better for it. The most meaningful thing I did in my second year wasn't a contract or a hire. It was a hiring decision. A woman named Patricia Osei came in to interview for an administrative position. She was 67. She had spent decades managing her late husband's import business and had never once put her own name on the work. She apologized 3 times during the first 10 minutes of the interview for being overqualified for the position. I hired her for a role that was not the one she interviewed for. I hired her for a role I made up on the spot because she was exactly what she was, someone who had been doing executive-level work for years inside a context that had no interest in calling it that. We had a conversation in my office a few weeks later, after most of the staff had gone. She said, "I keep waiting to feel like I belong here." "That feeling takes a while," I told her, "but it comes." She looked around at the office. "Did you always know you were capable of this?" I thought about that honestly. "No," I said. "I thought I was just helping." She nodded slowly. "Most of us think that," I said, "for much longer than we should." One evening late in October, just over a year after I pressed submit on that kitchen table, I stood at the windows of my office as the city went dark below me. Charlotte at night has a particular light, warm, diffuse, the kind that makes everything look like it's in the middle of something rather than at the end. Behind me, phones that rang with my name being asked for. Desks where people worked on things I had built. A company with my signature on the lease, my judgment in the systems, my name on the door. My name. On the door. I thought about the woman I had been 2 years before. The woman who smiled pleasantly at dinner tables and swallowed her opinions and stayed up after everyone else went to bed wondering if it was too late to want something. If I could go back to her, I would not tell her. Things would become easy. They wouldn't. I would not promise her that the people she loved would see her clearly without being forced to. Some of them wouldn't, not for a long time. What I would tell her is this. The life you've been building in the darks still belongs to you. Every skill you developed while someone else put their name on it is still yours. It does not expire. It does not become less real because nobody acknowledged it. And the moment you stop waiting for permission to use it, that moment is available to you right now. Not when the children are grown. Not when the time is finally right. Not when someone finally tells you you're allowed. Right now. Tonight. Whatever quiet kitchen you're sitting in, you are allowed.